NBC10 at Issue starts now.
You don't vote once for change, you fight for change.
Democrat Joe Sestak wants a rematch. He's hoping to take on Senator Pat Toomey for a second time. Sestak believes he can beat the conservative U.S. Senator, but two other Democrats stand in his way. Today, it's Sestak's chance to convince voters that he's got what it takes.
Go, 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 go!
Good morning. I'm George Spencer for NBC10 at Issue. Today we hear from Democratic candidate for U.S. Senate Joe Sestak. Sestak, a former admiral and U.S. congressman, is running against two other Democrats for the party's nomination. Sestak will take on John Fetterman, the mayor of Braddock, a small town just outside of Pittsburgh. Some observers say his campaign has been gaining steam lately as he positions himself as the anti-establishment candidate. Fetterman recently endorsed Bernie Sanders for president, calling him an innovator. And Katie McGinty, the former chief of staff of Governor Tom Wolf. You may recall McGinty lost to Wolf in the gubernatorial primary. McGinty grew up in the Northeast, the daughter of a Philly cop. She has endorsed Hillary Clinton for president, calling her a proven champion of the middle class. And of course, the winner takes on Pennsylvania's freshman Senator Pat Toomey. The most recent polls put Toomey ahead of all three Democrats, with Sestak coming the closest. A little bit of history for those who've been following it. Sestak narrowly lost to Toomey back in 2010. And Admiral Sestak, we thank you very much for being here. We want to start out of the gate with sort of the central question of your candidacy in this race. Why you think you make a better candidate to take on the incumbent, the other two Democrats in the field?
My whole life has been about service. You know, I left high school here, went off to the Navy. I got to walk on the ground as head of the Navy's anti-terrorism unit early in the war in Afghanistan. I served as President Clinton's Director of Defense Policy. But I was most proud at being called Dad. And when my 4-year-old daughter got brain cancer, I needed to get out to take care of her. Only 8% of kids survived to brain cancer. And because of the wonderful health care we had in the military, I came back home here. And I ran for Congress to fight for the Affordable Care Act so everyone had the opportunity I did. But then we kept our office open 7 days a week till late at night because there's this recession going on. We wanted to serve. 18,000 people walked in that door. And then that's 4 times more than any other congressional office. I did narrowly lose, but I didn't become a lobbyist. I actually wanted to serve again, and that's why I went to teach. So the bottom line is, I want to serve people and help them ensure that they can have their children have the opportunity mine have had.
It sounds like, Admiral, a personal mission for you is what I'm hearing from all of this. Some of the polls, latest polls really not that recent, but back from the fall, do show you ahead of your Democratic rivals in a challenge against Toomey, though still behind the incumbent. How much stock do you put in the horse race as it stands right now? How closely are you watching?
Well, I only watch one thing. What can I bring to the table to help people? It's why I did that walk across Pennsylvania. I held up my combat boots I'd worn on the ground in Afghanistan in front of Independence Hall. And every day as I walked those 422 miles, I did an event for our seniors. Because when I was in Congress, I was called the most productive congressman of my class by Steny Hoyer, the majority leader. 19 pieces of bipartisan legislation we passed that helped our seniors, that helped cut education costs. So all this time I focus on one thing, and they'll reward you if they believe that you're accountable to them.
If we think about the primary fight that you're up against right now, it's Fetterman and McGinty. From where you're sitting, we reported at the top of this show, some observers see that Fetterman may have some traction right now. Is he the stronger of the two opponents from your perspective?
Again, you know, when I was doing that walk across Pennsylvania, I always said anybody who wants to get in should get in. For me, again, to me, it's not a horse race. This is about people, and I mean that. I stood in front of Independence Hall and I said, we're in a fight for the soul of America. We, the people, that begins our Constitution. And, George, I believe that every day. If you're out there, we just finished an event, just drove here from Allentown. I leave here and go to Doylestown to do an event on health care, mental health parity, and others. If you're out there fighting on the issues, you'll gain the trust of the people to go in Washington and do what they need.
Sounds like you're really fighting your own campaign and working to make it about the message that you're trying to get out there, though all of this, of course, though, occurs in context. How many people who followed Pennsylvania politics are aware of your background and some of, to the extent which you may have angered some party leaders in the Democratic Party back in 2010 with your run at that time? How are your relationships with party leaders and with the party as a whole in 2016?
Look, it's not that I'm anti-establishment. It is true I'm an independent representative of people, but the fact that I could be called the most productive congressman, passing 19 pieces of bipartisan legislation, shows I can work within the establishment. Also, George, I represented
Are relations with party leadership, do you consider them repaired? Where does that stand is what I'm asking.
I'm going to the state committee. The state committee chairman was just on the phone with me a week ago. Look, we've done 800 events for other people throughout this state. When I didn't win, I didn't want to lobby. I turned down all those rich contracts that are offered in Washington, D.C. by people. 400 congressmen and senators took them. And then Governor Rendell called me and said, "Joe, would you run for governor?" And I said, "No, Governor." I said, "My strengths are better suited to the United States Senate. That's where I'm going to run." And so my point is, Governor Rendell and I would talk every few months. But what I'm most focused on is not party. It is truly people, because they just want to have the American dream that right now is under siege.
What about the way the party may play a role in fundraising, Admiral? Where does fundraising stand, and how important is support from the party on that front?
Yeah. You know, it's a great question, because when we ran against Pat Toomey, we had the largest funding gap because Citizens United had started that year. I raised as much as Pat Toomey, but outside interest groups gave me a 3-to-1 funding gap, and we only lost by 2. Dan Honorato, our gubernatorial candidate, with the establishment support, lost by almost 10. That's why, George, it's important to focus on people. Now, we do have more than anyone else running in the primary, but that's because we started early, worked hard. At the end of the day, doing events like today, Doylestown on health care, is really what matters, because people want to know, what do you stand for?
You know, during an election season, Admiral, people always talk about attack ads that ended up airing. And, of course, during your matchup against Senator Toomey last time around, attack ads were a piece of that. Is that something we could expect in this round as well?
If Pat wants to do it, that's fine. All I know is this, is that I had 5,000 seniors and veterans walk in my congressional office that were hurting. I had 1,000 people whose homes were going into foreclosure, and we helped save almost 650 of them. I will be fighting every day on the positive message of I can be held accountable, and I have results to show it, whether it's in the Navy, standing up for your sailors, or actually in my district, keeping that office open at 9 o'clock every night. It's about people. That's the message. And also, when I get to Washington, to accomplish it.
Admiral, I've heard you mention seniors again and again as something that you recall, and you worked as a group, you worked to serve during your last time in office. I know you've spoken about a plan to improve health care in our country. Yes. What are the basics of that plan?
Well, the Affordable Care Act, even though it's not perfect, is a great advance. Up until that was passed, 165 Pennsylvanians are losing their health care every day. Now what we need to do to help seniors is let Medicare actually negotiate for best prices. If I go to the Veterans Administration, the cost of a drug is half or less of what Medicare can, because they're forbidden by law to negotiate best prices. Our seniors are paying $123 billion over the next 7 years because Medicare cannot negotiate for best price. But in addition, when I was down there, I passed the Elder Abuse Act, the first senior protection act from financial and other types of abuse in 17 years. Seniors are a very significant part of our population, as we know it in Pennsylvania, and that's why Medicare and Social Security must be protected.
When you speak about ACA, the Affordable Care Act, otherwise known commonly as Obamacare, you mentioned that there are some shortcomings in it. Yes. What are the biggest shortcomings from where you're sitting today?
Well, one of them is that in the House, we said if a company had 50 or more employees, it had to all of a sudden provide health care. And so companies would start to hire at 50 instead of 50th employee part-time workers. We didn't have that in the House. That was stuck in by the Senate. In the House, we said it should be a certain percentage of the payroll. That's one thing that we need to fix. And so the other types of issues that we need to do is to ensure that the growth of the affordable care organizations, there's 140 the first year, now there's 750, those that begin to take care of you for quality of care, not how many times you get reimbursed for a visit, so that soon all general visits to go to your doctor are free. A number of healthcare companies are already providing that today. It's just beginning.
Want to switch gears to another topic that has been really at the forefront of the nationwide discussion, a topic you would be part of in Washington, D.C., and that's the issue of gun control and gun safety in this country. Want to know if you approve of the president's executive order on background checks on that front?
I do. I wish we could have gotten it through Congress and the Senate with more courageous people. But I also know this. When I commanded a ship that went to the Persian Gulf, for example, as a Navy captain, if you had a gun, I let you bring it aboard if you had your permit, and in the afternoons I would tow a sled with a deer on the back of it for a few hours so the crew could just, you know, enjoy themselves as they might have here in Pennsylvania. But I know this, I don't want my fellow veterans, many of them, police officers, going up against assault weapons. When the Clinton administration passed the assault weapons ban, the murders of police officers dropped 22% to zero, because it used to be 22% of all murders. There is common sense gun violence prevention measures that we need more courageous people to stand up and fight for.
Admiral Sestak, don't go away. We'll have much more coming up. We'll talk to the Admiral about his immigration plan, including the two things Sestak believes immigrants need to prove before they can become American citizens.
This is NBC10 at Issue. This is NBC10 Issue.
Former Admiral and Congressman Joe Sestak is running for the U.S. Senate. Sestak hopes to take on Pennsylvania's junior senator, Republican Pat Toomey. But first, he, of course, has to win the Democratic primary. Admiral Sestak, you've been talking about bringing immigrants out of the shadows. That's the term that we've heard you use repeatedly. You believe, though, that path to citizenship should include proof of a job and also an English test. How would that work together?
Well, I'm a big believer in immigration. My pop is an immigrant, came from Czechoslovakia. I can remember him with 8 kids, as my mom was a high school math teacher, sitting at the table and saying, penny for college, penny for food. Immigration is rich in our American land here. I believe this. You need a bipartisan pact to come together, and I fought for this when I was in Congress, to where we need to secure our borders. I know as head of the Navy's anti-terrorism unit that south of the border, Al-Qaeda was involved for a while in drug trade. We need to secure it for a number of reasons, but I also believe this, that we need to bring those who are in the shadows out of the shadows, the undocumented. And we should have them go to the back of the line, but out of the shadows on a path to citizenship, and have background checks, pay back taxes, make sure that you can have a job, and make sure that you can learn English, and get in that line and proceed right there.
And I want to ask you about that a bit further. The English test, why is that important as part of this plan?
We're Americans. Just like my father came here and could teach Slovakia, he also learned English. We are a society that sows values. I wish my father had taught me how to teach Slovak. But you know what? When we go around this world and English is heard, I walked off that ship into Egypt one day, and right away, the other naval officers knew who I represented, America. No, we value when you're out there fighting together that you all speak that common language, but also value that they keep their own heritage.
Senator Toomey recently called that immigration plan, his words, a threat to public safety. Your response to that, given what you've just said?
Pat Toomey has always said no. No, he said, vote to shut government down 3 times. No, there should be no path to citizenship. I got it, Pat, but what is your practical solution to this? Look, in a perfect world, our borders would have been secure. But you know what? Even Ronald Reagan stood up and did a bipartisan pact in order to do it in his time. If you can have a leader like that on the Republican side, why not once again?
You would be, if this race goes as you hope it will, taking part in a national political dialogue at this point. Obviously, your race is occurring in that context. One of your opponents has backed Clinton. The other has backed Sanders. Who are you supporting in the Democratic primary?
It's a great question. You know, I worked in the White House and worked with Mrs. Clinton. I think she has the temperament and actually has the personality to be a commander, a great commander-in-chief that our military can respect. I love the idea of Bernie Sanders bringing in income inequality, a scourge of the era, into the debate. But when I ran against Senator Specter, against my party's desires, after they asked me to run against him, and then when Specter switched parties said, sit down, I said, no, I'm representing people. I never asked one person or organization for an endorsement, nor did I endorse anyone. And I believe the same thing because I found out that, you know what? It's not about endorsements of or for people, and I haven't done it in this race either. It is about people. That's the way I was in the Navy. Take care of yourselves, take care of the mission. That's the way I am as I run my race, for people.
So no endorsement on the Democratic side.
But great respect, particularly Mrs. Clinton, who helped, by the way, Agent Orange get moved into coverage of more of a Vietnam veterans when I was in the White House. She did a lot of great things because I knew her.
Back in the national context, you've said Donald Trump being president would be a catastrophe. If you both did win, how would you work with him?
Same way I do in my Republican district. George, remember my district is 56% Republican when I was a congressman, 33% Democrat. I was the second Democrat since the Civil War, but guess what? Because we kept that office open 7 days a week. You could come in any time and talk to me, and we'd handle your problem. I won my second race in a Republican district by spending only $28,000 on yard signs by 20 points. We even run that Republican district in our statewide race against Pat Toomey. No, I want to represent Republicans, independents, and Democrats.
Admiral Sestak, stay right there. Much more to come with you. We'll talk more when we come right back. Stay with us.
This is NBC 10 at issue.
We are back with Pennsylvania candidate Joe Sestak. Sestak is running against Braddock Mayor John Fetterman and former Chief of Staff to Governor Wolf, Katie McGinty, in this spring's Democratic primary. He'd like to take on Republican Senator Pat Toomey. And Admiral Sestak, you've been really outspoken about the recent Iran deal, especially on the issue of this prisoner swap, calling for very strict enforcement. How can you see that working?
The Iranian Accord is something that actually stopped Iran 30 days from having a nuclear bomb, actually 4 to 5. And now they cannot produce one for at least a year, and if we continue to have strong enforcement, up to at least 15 years. Look, I've operated in those Persian Gulf waters. Our submarines can't even, our ships can't even find the 19 midget Iranian submarines that are there. We'll have to pull our carrier battle group back. And we can take down the Iranian nuclear infrastructure, but guess what? We can only stop it for 4 years. Now we have a chance to actually get rid of their nuclear weapons peacefully. I learned something in the military, that militaries can stop a problem, but we can't fix a problem. George, you don't think we fixed Iraq, do you? And that's something that Pat Toomey voted for by saying Iraq had a nuclear weapons development program, which they didn't.
Given your background, then, Admiral, of course, in the armed forces, some people, some supporters have said you have a stronger foreign policy understanding than do your opponents. Is that correct? How will that work for you as we move forward?
I think there's an absence on both sides of the aisle in the U.S. Senate of those that understand the fine nexus between foreign policy and military policy. Look, 47 Republicans signed a letter to the Ayatollah of Iran who said, death to America, and said, ignore our presidency. Let's have a bipartisan pact against the president and ignore the negotiations. But on the Senate side, Democratic side of the Senate, who was down there roaring that could actually stand up and with respect to John McCain say, wait a minute, John, this is not right. This Iranian Accord is actually going to make Israel and America more safe and has the cred to do it. But you know what? At the end of the day, national security begins at home, and health and education security. And that's why I also want to be on the health Education, Labor, and Pension Committee in the Senate.
Given the perspective that you have, Admiral, one thing that's been a hot topic certainly around the Philadelphia region, Veterans Affairs hospitals, veterans in general, taking proper care of our veterans. What does your plan see us doing moving forward, trying to improve things for people who've served our country?
First, I'm going to be there every day for our veterans. Every Veterans Day and almost every Armed Forces Day, while Congressman and even this Veterans Day, I go into a prison and speak with our veterans. I went to Grady Ford Maximum Security Prison this November 11th and spoke to 150 vets. And I sat there and talked with them for several hours and told them they're not going to be forgotten. When I went to Congress, I voted for the largest increase, $10 billion for PTSD, traumatic brain injuries, and others, so our vets aren't forgotten. Look, Pat Toomey voted to send war. I was over there in a carrier battle group. He visited my carrier battle group, and he came home, and Pat Toomey voted against every veterans appropriations bill since he was a congressman until December. I will fight for veterans every day.
Admiral, is it all about money on the veterans front?
No, it isn't. Why do you think I go there and go to those maximum security prisons? Look, the third person on my staff I hired was a former incarcerated person. It's also saying to them, you know what? You're welcomed in more than just the day that you came home. They need jobs. And that's why there's plans like Texas does that we should have here in Pennsylvania, where 27 vets sit in an office. And when someone leaves the military, their discharge papers are given to them. They're called up and said, let us connect you for a job over to this company that's looking for it. There's practical resource ways that we can help vets, but most of all, never forget, a vet is double the citizen by having served for us overseas.
Admiral Sestak, we really appreciate your time. Thanks for making time for us. Very well. Appreciate it, sir. Thanks very much. And the 2016 Pennsylvania primary is April 26th. It is a closed primary, which means that only people who have registered with a party can vote. The last day to register to vote is March 28th. We'll be right back.